Hello, it's the Great Canadian Beggar here, coming to you with the final in the Path to Victory series. Though, again, I might do an update to Atlantic later, but for now I'm not doing that quite yet. Now, at the top of the video, I have two big announcements to make. I have kind of suddenly crossed 1,000 subscribers. I didn't quite expect this to happen this quickly, so I was a bit caught off guard by this. So I'm going to do a 1,000 subscriber Q&A. So if you have any questions you want to submit for a Q&A, comment below and just put Q&A in the comment so I know which you want it for. These don't have to necessarily be directly related to anything, just anything you're curious about for me. I will hopefully be doing that next week. If you want your comment to be considered for the video, make sure you have it in by Friday, August 18th, when I will plan on recording that video. And the other thing coming through here is now my channel is fully monetized. So I am rolling out YouTube members section. I'm not going to change any of my original content. This is just means if you want to support the channel that you can. Everything else is going to be the same. So we have here 3 different package levels. Oh, I did this wrong. Oh, well, whatever. Anyways, we're not going to use my mouse to point at this. So we have the first package level, which is plain bagels. This is just your regular member stuff. You'll get the badges, you'll get the emojis, and I will make sure to try to reply to your comments. I will not guarantee you that I will always reply, because you might not have anything to say. So you might just get the like in love or whatever. I don't know. But if I have anything intelligent to say to you, I will make sure I say it to you. Some of my videos, like the most recent one on Trudeau Stumbles, has so many comments that it's hard to go through all of them. So I'll prioritize you if you have that level. If you go to an Everything Bagel, you'll get a link to the Discord, and I will give you a shout out when you join at that level in that video. And new videos will be open a day or two earlier for you if you want to look at them. And then finally, if you want to subscribe at the breakfast special level, on the Discord there will be a channel you can go to. If you are at this tier level, you'll get a special Discord role. Assuming I can make this work out, but I'm pretty sure I can. And then you can, using your Discord role, you can comment on a special channel, and you can ask for particular election projections given something. It's given like whatever criteria you want, like these vote shares or something like that. Once a month, and I will do it. Now, I will note, I'm not necessarily going to make a video for it, but I'll make you a map and data tables. Now, I will note, all of these will stand for revision, and I might revise them later because I've not done this before, and some of these might be dumb. Some of these might be too much. If you have any feedback, by all means, let me know below in the comments. I'm not going to change any of my regular content. This is just making use of revenue generation tools. If you want to give me money, feel free. If you don't, that's cool. I don't really care. Doesn't bother me if you don't want to give me money. But with that, let us get on to the rest of the video. So we have our final province for Path to Victory. We have Alberta. Now, Alberta is an interesting province because in a lot of ways it's kind of like the twin but different of Quebec. Now, Quebec, other than a few particular instances like Diefenbaker in 1958 or Mulrooney in 84 and 88, has basically voted straight ticket left or center left leaning parties for almost the entirety of Canadian history, especially since 1935. Conversely, Alberta has basically voted entirely center-right in every single election since 1935. We have a few odd cases or odd elections where it's a bit closer than others, but it's basically been monotonically center-right since 1935. It is shockingly steadfast. It's one of the most stable regions in the entire country when it comes to polling and poll results. And usually you can look at a regional sample of Alberta and know immediately if that sample was done correctly or not. And usually they're not. They usually do a really bad job in rural Alberta in sampling that proportionally, which causes the Conservatives in Alberta to look like they are polling a lot lower than they are. So, if we zoom in here a bit, this will be no surprise. We're only going to do Alberta in 3 regions here. We have Calgary, Edmonton, and then just rural Alberta. We're doing it this way just for simplicity's sake. You could break up rural Alberta in different spots, but I think you'll see pretty quickly that there's really not much point in that. So first, let's just touch overall here. Let's scroll over a bit. You can kind of see here that the Conservative vote share from 1993 to 2011, and just as a reminder, 93 to 2000 is the PCs plus reform here in this share. From 93 to 2011 is basically just fluctuations around the mean. There's not really any meaningful differences. 2015, they do a little bad, but not that bad. It's still like 60%. 2019 is pretty normal, or sorry, is phenomenal. It's about 2000 level once you consider the PPC. And then 2021 is still solid. It's a little low, but still solid. If you go over here, you can kind of see why it's low. Aaron O'Toole got fewer votes despite population increase than Harper did in 2015. Now, the People's Party got 142,000 votes, so the overall right vote share is higher in 2021 than in 2015. But not as much as it could be because O'Toole just flopped really hard in Alberta. But in general, we can kind of see the population is trending up. Or sorry, the voter turnout has been trending up, especially the last 3 elections. It's been quite high turnout, that is. And it's still very stable. Any election going into 2023 has the capacity for the Conservatives. Specifically, they could get around 69% again. That is very possible. I'm not going to say it is guaranteed, but it's certainly a distinct possibility, because if we look at 2019 to 2021, yeah, there's likely some of these voters defected NDP, maybe, and there's probably some new voters turned out for the NDP, but most of this 360,000 voters who didn't vote for the Conservatives in 2021, some of them went third party, or sixth party, some of them went PPC, but a lot of them stayed home. There is like an inbuilt, give or take, 230,000 voters the Conservatives could access here pretty easily. And if you just, out of curiosity, just smack that in, then you'd be looking at 68% if those voters turned out. So, and again, it's a bit more complicated because some of them probably voted NDP, but not all of them, because I think a lot of new voters turned out for the NDP, a lot of younger voters. So the whole province has been very, very steadfast, especially over the last 30 years. So it stands to perfectly reason. You look at the regionals, such as rural Alberta, you look at this and, especially if you just look at the simplified table here, it's just remarkably steady, arguably trending right. The first 2 elections, 93 to 97, were about 78%. The last 2 have been about 80%. We can't say definitively it's trending right, because again, 78 and 82 are really just on the other side of the probability marker, because they got 80 in 2000 and 79 in 1997. So it's not impossible that those were just fluctuations upwards, but it could also just be that rural Alberta is still trending right, which is kind of wild to think about, because if it is trending right, that implies you could maybe see one day 90-10 margins here. And some people have this picture, because if you look at or are familiar with U.S. politics in any way, shape, or form, you might be aware that some low population counties in the U.S., in say like Texas, might vote 95% Republican. And usually that's because these are tiny, like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people counties. So very rural, very small town, possibly more likely village. But rural Alberta is not really like that. If I just close this here and you kind of look at this. So the deal with rural Alberta here, right? You select all, bear with me. So the deal here is you look at this rural Alberta. There's actually, so first off, how many voters are there? Well, about 700,000. So this is actually a sizable amount of people because it's 700,000 people split across about 13 ridings. That gives you quick math here. And yes, I'm using a calculator. I'm not that bad. I'm actually decent at math, but that's too much math for me. It's about 61,000. Wait, that can't be right. Yeah, that's 62,000 average turnout by riding. That's not population. That is actual voters who cast votes. That's quite substantial. Most places don't actually have turnout approaching it. Now, a lot of these ridings are actually bigger than average, but still. And you look at, in this, you have actually some sizable towns. You have Lethbridge, you have Red Deer, you have Fort McMurray over here. You have Peace River. No, not Peace River. Is that Prince George? And yeah, I don't recall. There's a town over here. I'm blanking on the name of it. You have relatively substantial towns in a lot of these places. In places that in other provinces would be basically their own riding. Like Lethbridge or Red Deer are about the size of Trois-Rivières. Possibly not quite as dense as Trois-Rivières, but similar size. And they vote overwhelmingly conservative. Fort McMurray itself is about 100,000 people, I believe. You correct me if I'm wrong. Now, obviously, not everyone there votes, but that gives you the idea. There's very large towns in rural Alberta that vote overwhelmingly conservative. It's not even remotely close. There's not a single riding in all of rural Alberta federally that is remotely competitive. And I will note that this outer donut of Edmonton is not being considered rural Alberta here, even though they have a lot of rurals in those ridings. Maybe I could have had that as a separate region. I don't know. Doesn't really matter either way. But they're a separate area for the purpose of this calculation because they have actually a lot of dense Edmonton suburb and or outer core as part of those ridings. In other places, you might say this is gerrymandered, but Edmonton also votes overwhelmingly conservative, so it doesn't really matter. Those suburbs that are included in these rural parts are also like vote overwhelmingly conservative too, so it's kind of funny. So why? Why is rural Alberta so mind-bogglingly conservative voting compared to rural Ontario or rural Atlantic Canada? Yeah, it's comparable to rural BC or rural Saskatchewan or rural Manitoba, but why? And actually, when I say comparable, even that's a bit understating it, because rural Saskatchewan doesn't really get these margins yet. Rural BC doesn't get these margins yet. Only a few ridings in rural Manitoba get these margins. And if you included Churchill, Kiewinett, Tuga here, it would be actually slightly less than that too. So what's the deal? Now, the general gist, really, and it's actually pretty simple. It's what the industry is in rural Alberta. It's why rural Alberta actually has so many people relative to the cities. Most other provinces' rural areas don't actually have that much area. And again, we are including cities of like 100,000 people in rural in this case, but You'll have to forgive me there. It's close enough compared to cities of millions of people like Edmonton or Calgary. The economy of rural Alberta is basically dominated by three things: oil, mining, farming. Farming is obvious. Farmers are naturally conservative. It's a bit complicated as to why, per se, but basically the farmer is the quintessential get off my lawn conservative. They don't want the government to tell them what to do. They just want to be left alone and grow their crops. That's just farmers across the board. So that makes sense. What about mining? Mining isn't what you would usually consider, historically, an overwhelmingly conservative profession. Now, that might strike you as odd, but it shouldn't. Historically, mining has been heavily unionized, and unionized workers have heavily voted for pro-union parties. And while I think the modern Conservative Party isn't necessarily anti-union, the NDP is obviously pro-union, albeit a lot of people in the NDP are unhappy with Singh's leadership, which likely hurts them here. But that's the gist. But why is that different in Alberta? It's pretty much no other province is like this. Though you could say possibly Saskatchewan is leading this way too. Well, it basically boils down to two things. First, the Liberals, and lesser extent the NDP, are very happy to regulate mining out of existence for climate reasons. They put all sorts of restrictions on making new mines, on running mines to make sure that there's no or minimal environmental impact, minimal carbon emissions, stuff like that. And you can argue whether those are good or bad policies, but the net effect of those policies is it makes it very hard for miners and mining companies. This means a lot of people who work in mining in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in BC, who usually might vote NDP for union reasons, are voting Conservative to protect their jobs because the Conservatives promised to make regulations easier on mining. And then you also have just general resentment to Eastern Canada, who takes off the plenty from Alberta and doesn't really give anything in return. Now, Albertans, generally speaking, are perfectly happy to be paying taxes that the rest of Canada can use in equalization programs. That's not really the problem Albertans have. The problem is they don't like when they are working hard in these jobs, making big salaries, paying big taxes, going to fund Eastern Canada, and then Eastern Canada votes to regulate out the existence of these industries that make the prosperity. And then finally, for rural Alberta, we have oil and gas. You can't underestimate how impactful oil and gas is to Alberta. First off, it basically funds the entire provincial budget. I think it's something like 70 or 80% of it is funded by oil and gas royalties. It allows them to have the lowest provincial taxes in the country, some of the highest median incomes in the country, not just in first order effects of people working in oil, but also the fact that those people have so much money working in oil means there's more demand for retail, more and all this stuff, which increases wages there. And naturally, the Liberals and the NDP despise oil. They want to kill the oil industry, blatantly, overtly. It makes it very difficult for any Albertan to support a party that wants to actively destroy the industry that not only pays their job, but subsidizes their taxes and makes their province have the prosperity it does. And that's kind of the feel you're going to get through all of this. And you could argue that's probably why we might be seeing an uptick to the right here, because since Trudeau took in power in 2015, we've seen the left become more and more anti-oil and gas. Lesser extent anti-mining, because a lot of the regulations that hurt oil and gas hurt mining as well. Now let's go to Edmonton. Now Edmonton, even if you exclude those three questionable outskirts ridings, it's still pretty much the same data, same numbers. Doesn't really skew much at all. Edmonton is what you would call a government town. It's where the provincial government of Alberta is based. It has lots of universities. It has lots of provincial bureaucracy and federal bureaucracy based there. You would normally expect a town like this to vote left-wing. It's how you expect Vancouver to vote left-wing, Winnipeg to vote left-wing, Toronto to vote left-wing, Ottawa to vote left-wing. The only other city like this in the country is Quebec City. It has the machinery of government there, full of bureaucrats, full of universities, full of all of this stuff that you would expect will make the area left-wing, but it isn't. People, especially on like pundits on Twitter or in the media, will often speculate or talk about how Alberta is moving to the left. It's not. At least, Edmonton's not. We just established rural Alberta is moving to the right, if anything, and Edmonton is flat. We look at the first two elections of the period, 54-55, the last two, 62-53. That's pretty flat, and actually I do have graphs for this. You can look at this graph, and the graph suggests, if anything, it's trending right, but the trend is so small, I don't think it's significant. So Edmonton is flat, which is surprising. You would expect a relatively big city that votes very left-wing provincially and has all the monikers of being left-wing to vote right. You would not expect that. Especially in the global climate where we are seeing more polarization between cities and rurals. And yes, federally, you do see some ridings in Edmonton vote left-wing. You have Edmonton, Strathcona, you have Greaseback, you have Centre that do lean left. But that's not enough. That's not really the story. Those are mostly and generally flukes. So now, if we were to color these in, so obviously these outskirt ridings are super safe. They're basically never going to go. And then if we have these inner city Edmonton ridings, we look at inner city Edmonton here, we get a slightly different picture. Now, it's still very overwhelmingly conservative, don't get me wrong, but it's a bit more competitive. Not quite. So you might not be able to tell the difference here, but this is a slightly lighter blue than this one. It's easier to see beside each other, harder if they're apart. So we get kind of this around the outer donut. It's a bit more competitive. There's some range of motion here. Not a lot, but some. And then we get kind of like this. Or is it this? So I think it's that. It's one of those two. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. I have a spreadsheet elsewhere, but I don't have it here. So it's a bit more competitive deep in the center. And then finally you have Strathcona. And Strathcona is naturally extremely safe. It's kind of hard to imagine Strathcona voting right presently. Maybe one day, but not right now. So why is Edmonton so steadfastly conservative? Well, it's basically the same reasons as rural Alberta, but instead of it being their jobs are at risk, it's more of the prosperity that subsidizes their taxes, their services. And also, I think we can't throw away general resentment to Ottawa for the perceived unfair treatment of Alberta. And it's quite reasonable to perceive this. For example, Quebec gets about $13 billion a year in subsidy or equalization payments. A lot of that comes off of the surplus Alberta generates. Now, it's not Alberta paying Quebec, but it is surplus created from Alberta largely paying that to Quebec. Now, part of the reason why Quebec has such a big equalization is a lot of things that generate revenue in Quebec, like hydropower, aren't considered income for equalization purposes, but oil and gas is. And a lot of other federal things, such as fiscal stabilization payments, are similarly skewed in a way that systemically disadvantages Alberta and advantages Quebec. And really Eastern Canada in general. My home province of Nova Scotia is not really any better, but Quebec is more obvious. So this causes a lot of resentment in Alberta. They get a lot of the brunt of anti-mining, anti-oil, anti-whatever legislation that comes in, because a lot of it is out west. But they not only do they suffer the brunt of all of this, they then pay the East who is doing this to them. It's really hard to understate how much resentment this makes. And then, again, the oil and gas industry subsidizes the entirety of Alberta. Everything is cheaper because of this. It's very hard to... Those two, whenever you consider Alberta and anything Alberta does, you have to remember those two. Resentment to the east and oil and gas. Everything makes sense once you consider those two things. The resentment is because of the damage to the industry that funds and makes Alberta prosperous. Now, finally, we have an actually somewhat interesting region in Alberta. Calgary. Now, why is this somewhat interesting? Well, it's the only region that, at least on a surface level, appears to have moved. You look in the 90s, in 2000, the Reform era, we have 69 to 78% conservative. And if you do simplify this down, like ignore other and stuff, it's 72 to 79. You look at the last three elections, or heck, if we want to look at the three best elections since then, we have 65, 66, and 68. Even 2019's sheer dominance barely rocked the boat compared to 90s numbers in Calgary. And this is where a lot of the narrative that Alberta's shifting left is coming from. That Calgary's moving a little bit. However, I think that's a huge misnomer. We look here at graphs. We can see here, this is if we include the 90s. And yes, there's a pronounced leftward trend if we include the 90s. Going from 70s to 60s, going from 30s to 40s. Obviously, this is going to mirror itself. There's a pronounced trend. You remove the 90s, and it's basically flat. Maybe there's a small trend, but it's almost indecipherable. And it's likely thrown off a little bit because O'Toole, in 2021's explicit strategy, was to lose votes in Alberta to win votes in Ontario. And to his credit, he successfully achieved half of his strategy. He just forgot to win votes in Ontario. So what does this mean in Calgary? Well, for all the same reasons Edmonton or rural Alberta, Calgary votes way farther right than you expect it to. Now, back in the day, and maybe you could say this is an artifact of this, in the 90s, 80s, 70s, Calgary is more of an oil town. It was built on oil fields and it produced more oil domestically. That's why Alberta has two big cities. Usually, you don't have two big cities. Almost no jurisdiction in the world has two big cities. Usually, how jurisdictions work is you have one big city, and then following that, you have cities following a predictable trend. I can't think of the name of this trend, but city size follows a trend in jurisdictions. The biggest one, then you have one I think is half the size, then a third, then a quarter, then a fifth, and etc., etc. It usually follows this trend. Now, some circumstances in some cases tweak this, change that, do whatever. Economic hardship can change this, but that's the general trend. Alberta has two basically equally sized cities. That never happens, really. Saskatchewan has it, but it has a very similar reason. But if you look at BC, it's Vancouver. Manitoba, it's Winnipeg. Ontario, it's Toronto. Quebec, it's Montreal. Halifax, Nova Scotia, it's Halifax. Newfoundland, it's St. John. PEI, it's Charlottetown. Now, New Brunswick is kind of the same deal, but even then, Moncton is kind of the big city. But, though, in the case of New Brunswick, you do have the two original cities were like Moncton and St. John, and I believe Fredericton was the compromise city because one was the English one, and one was the French one. And Fredericton ended up being the government center, so they kind of have three equally sized cities as a result. But Alberta and Saskatchewan have one city, which is the government town, and then one city which grew up around a major resource. I believe that is Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. Correct me if I'm wrong, any Saskatchewanians. And the other one is Calgary in Alberta, and it was an oil town where lots of oil was developed. But now it's been grown really big. It's a very large city. Fifth largest in Canada? Or is it fourth? Anyways, big city. So oil production and oil workers are a smaller percentage of the town, which probably explains why it shifted left a bit. And I think we should assume, federally, maybe even provincially too, it will drift to be similar to Edmonton. Though at the same token, I think Edmonton's going to drift slightly to the right, while Calgary shifts slightly to the left. The net of the cities will probably be slightly to the left, but Edmonton's probably going to trend right a bit, Calgary trend left a bit. Equalize the two, basically. So, this does mean in the maybe one day in the future Calgary is competitive, but right now, no. It's not. And there's not really a timeline where it will be competitive. At least near timeline. For all intents and purposes, since the reform era ended, it's been flat. There is really no trend in Alberta. Alberta's not moving. And again, if we go into Alberta or Calgary, and we color it, so we have really three regions in Calgary. So we have like the south and the west, which is just deeply, staunchly conservative. It's really not in a contest what that is, what the region is. A little bit to the north here, but that might be a fluke of the last few elections. But we'll see. This one might be trending to be like these other ones. If we look at provincially, it kind of trended to be like the rest of Calgary, if that makes sense. Then we have two final ones. So we have the inner core, which surprisingly is still fairly conservative on the federal level. And we have Calgary Northwest, which is kind of a toss-up. Northeast. I think it's called Skyview right now, actually, sorry. And that's surprisingly a toss-up on the federal level. You would expect the inner city to be more competitive than that particular riding, just in general things, but then you look at some demographics and stuff like that, and it's a bit more competitive. But it's still likely a one that the Conservatives should be able to win, especially if they want to win a majority, which is the point of this series. So overall, Alberta, staunchly, steadfastly conservative. it's kind of hard to imagine any government at any point for the Conservatives in the next 10 years, 20 years, winning a majority without nearly sweeping Alberta. A full sweep is not really possible, especially as we go to the 2024 map and we see 37 seat Alberta. It's going to get harder and harder to get a full sweep, just because even if the whole province votes 70% Conservative, the more seats you have, the margin of votes needed to win goes down. So basically, if Alberta was 1 seat, the Conservatives couldn't lose. If it was 2 million seats, they would only get 70% of the seats. Kind of hope that makes sense there. The more seats you have, the easier it is for someone else to win a seat. But with that, we kind of have the overall map here. And if we just take this in and we combine that with our total roll sheets here, so we have this. This is what you could reasonably call the Conservative path to victory here. Let's just get this to balance out. Here we go. These are the seats they need to look at to win. Now, again, I think I'm going to revise Atlantic. Recent polling makes me think that this is actually more competitive than it is. But this is the idea. Now, this is not saying the Conservatives can only get 174 seats. That is incorrect. This means that they are given enough elections and ignoring local candidates. 174 seems to be about their expected scenario, I think, right now, as of making the series. Though, again, I will probably revisit some of these areas, like Atlantic, because the polling numbers have changed so dramatically that the numbers math is different. But if you want to look at their ceiling with the Conservatives, what you would do, well, the first one is you have to look at the Liberals' first 1 and 2 and the Bloc's first 1 and 2. These are their ceiling areas. Now, you can't look at all of these because some of these are Liberal NDP, Liberal Bloc swings, but the general gist, like, we can get a good approximation here by just ignoring Quebec. So if we take all of the non-Quebec competitive seats that the Liberals have, that's 19. And then there's, like, let's say 4 pie-in-the-sky seats for the Conservatives in Quebec. So they get, let's say, 197 is probably their ceiling. Now, again, it's going to change a little bit because I'm going to revise the Atlantic numbers, I think, at some point in the future. It's not going to be right now. I'm going to give it a month or two just to see if the polling holds up into the fall for Atlantic. So I'm going to probably wait until October to revisit Atlantic. But I plan on doing that just because the numbers have changed so dramatically between when I recorded the Atlantic video, and I think it was May, and now. Or was that June? Doesn't matter. Numbers have changed dramatically in the region, so it's a very different picture. But with that, I will wrap the video up here. If you liked the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe. If you want to support the channel more than just watching the ads, you could sign up to be a member. Hopefully that should be live by the time this video is, or else that will be very embarrassing. But otherwise, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below. Now more than ever, your shares to other people you know is extra great because I get ad revenue now. Woohoo! If I get enough, if I can get make this work, making enough money for me, I can do this more professionally, more full-timey. I don't know. The quality of videos will increase, hopefully, if I make more money, because I can do more things. Oh, and one last final note I forgot to say in the beginning spiel on memberships. The memberships are probably going to only be a short-term thing. I have a better thing planned in the future, but I need to make a website for that. So once that website eventually gets made, which will be ages because I'm saving up to buy a house and I'm getting married, so that's a lot of money being spent. But once I have enough money to build the website I want, we're going to completely overhaul memberships, and I might delete most of them, most of the tiers, and move that to my own website. Though I'm probably going to keep some membership stuff just because, the YouTube emojis and stuff are kind of cool. You might want those. But with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you next week with a Q&A. Make sure you comment.